Welcome, everybody, to this week's Café Hangout. We are live.
I was waiting for the words. I am John Pollock, along with Wai Ting.
Oh, shit. One day I'm going to learn.
Every week. That's the official start of the show, is getting feedback from Wai's laptop. I'm John Pollock, joined by Wai Ting. We have a packed edition of the Café Hangout coming at you today. All of you double Ice Cap and Espresso members. We are going to be joined later on in the program by ESPN's Ariel Helwani, who's going to be joining us live from Montreal, the site of today's huge announcement by Georges St-Pierre that he is retiring from the sport of mixed martial arts. We're going to dedicate a significant portion of today's show to discussing Georges St-Pierre's career, and then we'll chat with Ariel, who not only attended the press conference, got to do a 30-minute sit-down with George after the press conference. So some great insight there. Lots to talk about with Ariel. We'll also be taking your phone calls if you want to chat about Georges St-Pierre's career, any wrestling news that's going on. 732-800-4423 is the number to call, and we will also be taking calls via Skype. Just add us, Post Wrestling, and you can call in. We will be taking calls at any point throughout the show, so call in, chat with Wai and I. How are you doing today, Wai?
I'm doing well. It's a very busy day.
I feel like you and I have done a lot of talking together today.
We actually already have, yeah. We're in the midst of Thursdays are kind of our bulk recording days, and not only that, we just had lunch with a good friend.
A good friend, a great friend.
Would you consider him a good friend?
I didn't know what was a secret or not.
We recorded a quick thing with Damian Abraham too for his 200th edition of his podcast, Turn Out a Punk, coming out soon.
Yes, that will be out next week. Very happy that we could be on with Damian. I'm sure he's not going to hear this, but nonetheless, our encouragement is there for you to go check out the 200th episode.
Also, up next this week, I am on with Braden Harrington talking about.
This is Wai's like fourth show of the day.
Oh God, I know. But I had a great chat with Braden this morning. Woke up bright and early, had my coffee, chatted about Velveteen Dream versus Johnny Gargano.
Was it lit?
It was lit. It was. What else did they say?
I have no idea.
It was full of BDE. I don't know what else they call it.
Well, you can check that out now at postwrestling.com. Up next, which rumor has it I will be joining Braden for next week.
That is the rumor, unconfirmed.
Today's show unofficially brought to us by not just Haichu, but Girl Scout cookies from our good friend Sean.
Okay, can you tell us the story of how we are all of a sudden holding Samoa cookies and Girl Scout Thin Mints?
All right. Well, I won't read this whole thing because this was, I guess, a private message to myself and Wai, but this is from Sean. There is a review you guys did with Samoa Joe selling Girl Scout Samoa cookies. You said you don't get them in Canada and never had one. That is a crime. So I ordered a box of each of you to try, plus a box each of my favorite Thin Mints.
Who can I get this gentleman's name?
Sean.
Sean. This was when John sent me a photo of this package in the mail. I can't tell you how ecstatic I was. The skit he's referring to was on this season's Edge and Christian show, where Samoa Joe
is selling Samoa cookies instead of samosa. Samoas.
Yeah, Samoa cookies. And I saw the skit. I thought it was hilarious. Joe is amazing in this sketch. I encourage everybody to watch it. But I don't think I could fully appreciate it because I've never had a Samoa cookie. We don't have girls like we don't.
I'd never heard of Samoa cookies before the skit.
Yeah, we don't have like proper like Girl Scout cookies like they do in the U.S. here. I guess we do, but
we have Girl Guide cookies.
Girl Guides, come on,
which are largely like there's nothing special about them.
Please. So how about on air, John? You and I have our very first taste test of a Samoa cookie.
You know, I'll have one in a little bit. I'm not gonna break my own rule.
Oh, you hate you.
I'm thinking of the listener out there.
I will have a bite of a Samoa cookie.
Okay, you have a Samoa cookie, and then you give us a review
in honor of Samoa Joe
and Georges St-Pierre's career. Wai is having a Samoa cookie. These are crisp cookies coated in caramel, sprinkled with toasted coconut, and striped with dark chocolatey coating.
I feel like tapping out because I was just putting a coquina clutch by these delicious cookies.
Oh, a coconut clutch.
Coconut coquina clutch. These are delicious.
Georges St-Pierre. Do you want to start there?
Mm-hmm.
We also have a bunch of wrestling news that we're going to get to as well, including a Hulk Hogan biopic that is in development. which will be quite something. But Georges St-Pierre, this is a really big news item in Canadian sports today. The press conference, it was carried live in some form or fashion, mostly digitally. TSN carried this, Rogers Sportsnet, CP24, 680 News, Global. Like, this was a very big sports story. I don't think if you don't live in Canada, I'm sure you can understand the kind of celebrity Georges St-Pierre is, but like Canada, it's that much smaller than the United States. It's when there is a athlete at that level performing on a worldwide stage, compound that and think of just how big this guy is. Someone that it would not be foreign to see him on the front page of a newspaper or the front of a magazine cover or leading the Sports Center highlights on. Like, his story will be all over Canadian press this week. Like, it's a really big deal. Georges St-Pierre stepping down.
Huge, yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think, like, it's hard for me to say like who in American culture, would be an equivalent, because it feels like so much of culture is American, and therefore, I would say like
this was not Wayne Gretzky. I know Dana White made that comparison once, and it's like that's a stretch, but I would say
some people he kind of is, depending on how much attention you pay to MMA, what age you are, like who is the closest person that we have. I mean, I don't know. I don't watch hockey anymore, but he's like, an Olympic level, like, superstar representative of that.
Let me put it this way. If I were to go down a random downtown Toronto street and ask 50 people who Georges St-Pierre was, I think 45 of them would know who Georges St-Pierre would be. I would imagine as many people would know who Georges St-Pierre is as Donovan Bailey, for instance.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Different eras too,
different time periods.
I'm looking at the chat room right now. Our friend Eric is saying he's something special, not only because of his success, but because of how he carries himself. And I think that's a major element to why he is so beloved by Canadians. I think he's a guy, through his humility, really embodies, I think, what we like to think of as, a Canadian's type of, like, personality, not somebody who's very braggadocious, not a Conor McGregor type. He's somebody who is incredibly successful, works hard, and doesn't really boast about it all that much.
He was the classic, like, he wore the white hat in combat sports, which often is so much associated with Floyd Mayweather's or Conor McGregor's. He was the antithesis, and it was a stark lesson that you needed to have that side of the equation. A Conor McGregor doesn't veer from the norm unless you have somebody like a Georges St-Pierre as that true north that people do want to get behind. And Georges St-Pierre was someone that people would spend money on pay-per-view or buy tickets to go watch fight. And it was because of, like, that side of the personality spectrum is also a very enticing one. And if everybody was Conor McGregor, it would not be special.
Well, in an age, I think, like, especially seeing in pro wrestling where, like, the anti-hero is so celebrated, I think it's increasingly difficult to be your,
George was Bruno Sammartino. That's who George was.
Well, to me, he was Bret Hart. Like, he was a real life Bret Hart, like from the 90s. You know what I mean? Somebody who represents Canada and, again, is incredibly respectful and humble in all his appearances. But George is a guy who, like, to me, for many years was the biggest babyface, the biggest pure babyface to me in all of combat.
100%.
WWE wasn't really producing him like that. Wrestling wasn't celebrating people like that. But George was a guy who was just, like, worked really hard, was not afraid to talk about his insecurities. And that just made you love him even more.
And that evolved. Like, there was, I think one of the best things for him was that hiatus he took from fighting in 2013. And it would be 4 years before he came back. But he had the fight with Johnny Hendricks, and it's a very arguable fight that Georges St-Pierre won that fight. I mean, he got the judges' favor that night, but that's a fight you could certainly look and believe that Johnny Hendricks won that fight. It was a split decision win for St-Pierre, and then he vacates the title afterwards. And it was such a big deal that Georges St-Pierre was going to make this announcement in December 2013.
We were there.
Wai and I get sent to a mall. He's going to do an appearance at a mall in Quebec City, which is a far cry from Montreal. It took a hell of a long time to get to this place. It was the day after our Christmas party. And we get to this mall. And prior to his mall appearance, he does a conference call to announce he is taking a hiatus. and vacating the welterweight title, which would be put up in a fight between Johnny Hendricks and Robbie Lawler. And it was several weeks later that I got to do a sit-down interview with Georges St-Pierre. And I walked in, and I'm used to this guy who is wound up so tight during fight week. He was a robot. He was programmed to take in the information of those coaches and trainers around him and apply it. And during fight week, he had an answer for every question that he's been asked a million times, and you got nothing out of this guy. And it was the most relaxed I had ever seen George after he relinquished his title. The weight of the world was off his shoulders. He was happy to see me. He was smiling, and he evolved so much that he started talking about big issues and a lot about himself. And it was a totally different person after that hiatus he took.
He spent a lot of time talking about big issues, but also
dinosaurs
and
aliens.
Yeah.
We do have a caller that's calling in. Who's this?
It is Paul from New Jersey. Hey, guys.
Hey, Paul. What did you want to chat about today?
What's up, Paul?
Yeah, hey, guys. I want to talk to, about GSP. For me as a person who, around the time MMA started blowing up, I was actually very overweight, and I got really into the sport. And my favorite guy was GSP. I was so inspired by the guy, and I actually started doing MMA and lost a lot of weight. And, I think he was one of the guys I really gravitated towards. And much to Wai's point, like, it's interesting because how you say how he carries himself. Like, my favorite wrestler of all time, and you guys might laugh, it's Marty Jannetty. I love the guy. I always loved watching him. But if someone said to me, like, hey, you guys want to go out and have dinner with Marty Jannetty today, I'd be like, I don't know if I would want to do that. But, like, with a guy like, yeah, I mean, I love the guy, but it's like, yeah, that might be a little exhausting and freaky, and I don't know where I'm going to end up. But, like, with a guy like GSP, I'm like, that's the guy I would love to, like, hang out and talk to. He seems like a really nice guy. I've heard him on, like, a lot of interviews, and he just seems like, a sweetheart. So I think to Wai's point, like, I think that does make a big difference, and I think he really represents your country very well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he has a lot of the qualities that I see in Bryan Danielson, a guy that he is not going to lie to you. He is someone that, I mean, you can tell when he's been in negotiations, like, he'll be coy about certain details, but he'll be upfront about, I have to keep certain things confidential. But he is an open book, and he is going to tell you what's what and what's going on with the UFC and what's going on with management, and if he had issues and why a fight isn't going to take place. Like, he was an incredibly open book when it came to that stuff, and that certainly increased over the last 4 to 5 years.
What are some?
Absolutely, yeah.
I was going to ask you, Paul, what are some of your favorite memories from his career?
I think the first fight I saw that really was like, oh my God, this guy's going to be something, was against Jay Heron. Because, again, I was very young in watching the sport at the time, but I knew Jay Heron that guy was a big deal. That guy was, a tough guy to finish, very durable. And GSP, I think he just destroyed him in like 2 minutes. I'm like, wow, this guy might be something here. And I think that is a feud against Matt Hughes, losing with 1 second left. And I'm like, oh, how heartbreaking. And then coming back and beating Matt Hughes twice. And, yeah, just a lot of great memories. And lastly, before I hang up, I just wanted to say, I didn't know where a best time to say this, but I always want to tell you guys, I'm losing my vision, and I suffer from a lot of eye diseases. And I finally just got approved where I am going to Portland to maybe find a cure. It's amazing. It's
wow. It's
been 20 years, and you guys, so many of those days are hard, and I just load up my stuff of post wrestling, and the day that should be hard, I'm laughing, I'm enjoying myself. So I just wanted to thank you guys, and just want to shake your hands when I see you in Broadway.
Wow, that's incredible, Paul. Thanks very much for sharing that. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely,
dude.
Thank you for all that you guys did.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you, man.
And we look forward to seeing you
guys
when we're down there.
Look forward to seeing you too.
All right, thanks, Paul.
That's crazy. We talk about wrestling. I'm here just doing a show, talking to my friend about professional wrestling without any kind of thought of what somebody like Paul might be gathering from it. And the fact that we could do that for him, that's we will continue to do the show forever.
Yeah.
Honestly.
I mean, it's always, sometimes you don't really take into effect what kind of, who's listening and what it's providing for them. And I'm sure you and I can probably speak of our own examples where you look for a certain form of entertainment that gets you away from some hardship that you're dealing with. Mm-hmm. He did bring up the the feud with Matt Hughes. And here's a fighter that he had 2 losses in his career, and I thought both were very big defining fights of his career. The Jay Huron fight, it led to the first fight with Matt Hughes, and he was submitted with 1 second left in the first round. And it took him 6 fights after that to get back to challenge for the title, or 5 fights. He beat Matt Hughes, and then it was the loss to Matt Serra. And the Matt Serra loss was probably in some ways, the most important fight of his career, because it was after that. And he talked about this at the press conference today, that he was utterly humiliated in that fight. And it was his ego that took the biggest pounding. And he probably could have gone down a big slump at that point. And he made changes all around him, from training, management. He changed everything around. He admitted he did not take that fight seriously. He didn't train very hard for it. And he never lost a fight after that. And I wonder if that Matt Serra loss doesn't happen at that stage of his career. Something that I find a common trait when I've heard from fighters, wrestlers, any kind of person that is at that high level, it's an obsession with failure. That is what drives you, because it's the fear of that failure that pushes you to, when most are ready to call it a day and not push themselves to that next step. It's that frightening paranoia of fear. And that's getting into George's head of, that's an enormous weight to carry, that you go through this unbelievable, arduous struggle to get to a fight, to preserve your belief that you are the best. And as soon as it's over, you're being asked, when are you going to fight next? And it's a never ending, it's just running in place of just every time there will be another next fight.
Yeah, we see it so often, like the story of Ronda Rousey and how she took her losses. I'm sure is a very common story. Many Olympians, high-level athletes, and of course champions in MMA all feel at the very same time. It's hard for me to think of maybe, in particular with MMA, something more mentally demanding. When you're part of a team sport, obviously it's still very tough, especially if you're like a star player. But if you're in there in a UFC cage where like sometimes a whole year of training leads up to, these 25 minutes in a cage, maybe even less, that I can't imagine that level of stress. So somebody like George, certainly, like when that stress got to be so much, you definitely got to see it, see him in interviews, just not be himself. And this was like a topic that they would focus on in like his documentaries, and also, even like the primetime series and whatnot.
Some of the fights that come to mind for me that really stand out as big ones. The first fight with BJ Penn, the second fight with BJ Penn was so enormous. That's when BJ Penn is the lightweight champion coming up to fight George at welterweight. It was the first primetime series, which Ariel Helwani actually worked on that series. It's tremendous. The final scene of the montage of George and BJ, they're packing to go travel to Las Vegas for the fight. And it's done to this song called Last Man Standing by People in Plains. And it's outstanding.
It changed the game as far as I was concerned, as far as, combat sports hype videos. I mean, it was that plus 24/7 with Mayweather.
That was certainly the influence, was 24/7 that UFC implemented on their time. You were there at the Rogers Center for the Jake Shields fight. I was not there for that particular fight, but there you go. Like, yes, it was an enormous success with like the UFC coming for the first time, but Georges St-Pierre headlining against a relatively unknown to the masses in Jake Shields. That was only his second UFC fight.
But it didn't matter. Like, it was first of all, we were there for the UFC. That was the big draw.
But it was also enormous on pay-per-view, and that's George.
Right. Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. It felt like a big show, and it felt like it was like a massive homecoming for...
Where were you when he entered the arena?
I was in the press area, which was, I guess, more like, where the restaurant tier is, kind of like around that whole spot. Yeah.
There was so much activity happening in the Rogers Center that night that cell phone service was like, you were not able to get a text out. Like, it was like, that's how much cell phone activity was happening in that building.
It was like WrestleMania, man.
Yeah. Well, any that stand out to you? I mean, you and I covered the Carlos Condit and Nick Diaz fights, which to me, he comes off the torn ACL, comes back to fight Carlos Condit. This is November 2012. And he talked about the proudest moment was taking a head kick from Carlos Condit and weathering through that to win. And then he comes back 4 months later and beats Nick Diaz. And I think that turnaround to push yourself to fight twice in 4 months was ultimately what I think contributed a lot to the hiatus after the Johnny Hendricks fight later that year.
Yeah, certainly. I think by that point you could totally see the mental wear. But for me, a lot of highlights for me or came maybe earlier in his career were like when he finally beat Matt Hughes.
That was a huge
That
moment.
was insane. I think, so often we see like maybe even as a Canadian, I underestimate, like how far this guy could go. Like, oh, okay, like here's a good looking guy. He's probably very good, but maybe he's not going to beat Matt Hughes. Matt Hughes at this time was like an unbeatable champion. And when he actually did it, I certainly wasn't expecting it. And I remember that moment to this day, that head kick. And here's this Canadian guy from the country that I'm from beating this unbeatable man in Matt Hughes. And yeah, it just started off this wonderful, wonderful ride.
And I think that with everyone seeing that Matt Serra fight, that was always there in the back of people's mind, that as dominant as George was, there was always the chance, oh, what if he slips?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that added to the intrigue of any fight, no matter how much of a favorite George was. And I mean, outside of that Johnny Hendricks fight, like he won in pretty convincing fashion. We go to Jake, who is on the line.
Hey, how you guys doing today?
What's up,
doing
Jake?
Great, Jake.
Yeah, doing great, doing great. Yeah, I just want to a couple questions here. Yeah, I mean, I remember the first time I watched MMA was actually on UFC 74 when Georges St-Pierre fought Georges Koscheck, and and my dad had it on pay-per-view, and it was it was the first MMA fight that I ever saw, and just fell in love ever since. And George was one of those fighters that it not only was one of the greats, but also that he was one of those fighters who actually had integrity. And yeah, it's been such a pleasure just watching him perform throughout the years. So yeah, what a great career he had. I just want to ask, it's a bummer that we're not. I always wanted to see George fight against Conor McGregor, but for some reason, I don't know why, but was there ever any consideration for that to happen, or was it just no interest from either parties for that?
The belief was always that if you remember, Georges St-Pierre attended UFC 196, and George was not the type of fighter that would just show up randomly at fights to watch them. And that was the night that Conor McGregor was fighting Nate Diaz, and Nate Diaz won the fight. And I believe had Conor won that fight, that would have been the direction they would have gone. Like that was, and to this day, I feel is the biggest fight the UFC could have made. It would have been, I think it would have broken every record, including the current one that stands with Conor and Khabib Nurmagomedov. That's how big of a fight it could have been between the two, but it didn't happen. And I think that's the closest it probably ever got to happening. And if Conor won that fight, who knows? That may have been where they went. That could have been a huge fight for UFC 200 that year.
Yeah. So yeah, just a great career, and also just one wrestling question.
Sure.
I'm really looking forward to the. I'm really intrigued on the developments of All Elite Wrestling, and seeing what the possible TV deals would be. TV deals that might be negotiating as well. So, are you guys hearing anything about them getting close to any sort of close to negotiations, either in the U.S. or Canada, about those, and what networks they might be looking at?
Not on nothing on the Canadian front, and I mean, just what's out there, that no deal has been signed yet, but it's like there's lots of interest. Like it seems like they're going to land a pretty favorable deal. Like I don't imagine them landing on a small viewed station that's going to be putting them on outside of prime time. Like it's there's demand for their product.
Yeah, so I'm studying television at my school, and I'm pretty familiar with some of the networks. And I have a cousin living in Mississauga, so I'm pretty familiar with some of the Canadian networks as well. Here, eventually, I would love to see them be on TNT and TBS, either of those two, to see what kind of wrestling, if they have have them have wrestling again. But man, maybe in Canada, I think the biggest, some of the rumors have some of the things that might be good fit for them would probably be Bell Media or TSN or maybe the Shaw networks. But so yeah, it's pretty much a fun time to be a wrestling fan right now. So can't wait for Double or Nothing. And by the way, I'm going to be at in Las Vegas for Double or Nothing. So and Starcast. So I'm pretty excited for it. Got my tickets ready, and yeah, looking forward to it.
What shows are you going to check out at Starcast? What are you going to make sure you see?
I know that Conrad Thompson has I think has another form with Eric Bischoff. I'm not sure about that, but looks like pretty looking forward to it. So
cool.
Yeah,
well, Jake, thanks a lot for the call. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Thanks,
Jake. So thank you to that. If you want to give us a call, once again, the number is 732-800-4423. In just a little bit, we'll be joined by Ariel Helwani of ESPN. He'll chat with us about the legacy of Georges St-Pierre. He has been covering him for his entire career and also got to do a sit-down interview with the retired St-Pierre.
We never got St-Pierre versus Connor, but am I glad that we actually did get St-Pierre versus Nick Diaz? Because I thought that was just such a perfect feud between two very, very different personalities.
That was still the most insane fight week I've ever covered.
Those press conferences were very strange, but they were so awesome.
Every day it was something with Nick Diaz that you didn't know. Yeah, like he didn't show up to the open workouts. There was him complaining about the water they were using on the airplane. Like you just didn't know what was going to happen day to day with Nick Diaz. That was where Wolf Tickets was coined by, or at least repeated by Nick Diaz. And it resulted, like there was so much chaos. It definitely helped the pay-per-view buys that week. And that did such a great number that Nick Diaz, like that was the most money he had ever made in his life. And he didn't have to fight again until the Anderson Silva fight 2 years later.
Wait, was that his? Okay, yeah, Anderson fight.
But it's been 4 years since he fought Anderson Silva.
Yeah, wow.
So, I mean, he's been living off the money off of those two fights primarily. One other thing with George that's worth mentioning from today's press conference is, the reasoning he explained that he was trying to put together a fight with Khabib Nurmagomedov and stated that both fighters wanted it, but the UFC did not want it. And they had plans for Khabib. And he was kind of explaining the fact that, he is not looking to come back and be a regular fighter that's going to be fighting every 6 months. He's looking for one-off fights that motivate him. And I don't think he wants to commit to anything more than the one fight that he can mentally prepare himself for and know that he's got to continue.
He doesn't want the pressures of being a champion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think with the UFC, they're looking at it from the standpoint of, do we want to hold up a division? Do we want George to win a title and then never defend it and vacate it? And that's even with Nurmagomedov offering to do a catchweight fight. He was asked if Dana White changed his mind and came to him and was willing to do the Nurmagomedov fight, would he be changing his mind? And he said that he looked at it, this was a business offer. And when you make a business offer, it's not good 6 months from now. It's good today. And once the offer's off the table. But he also acknowledged he doesn't know where he will be mentally in a few months. And like he left the door open. He did not shut it completely. That, there could be a reversal. So I really feel, I hope that this is it for him. I hope that doing this big announcement is it for him. And there's always going to be the enticement of doing another fight. And George is one that he has enough money. I don't think it's money that is fueling him at all. It is simply legacy building. There's always going to be that fight that can somewhat enhance your legacy, but equally, it can distort your legacy as well. If you take he's going to be 38 years old this year. And like, it's a very interesting fight with Nurmagomedov if it happens today. But as the months and years go on, that's a fight that I just think doesn't make a whole lot of sense for St-Pierre.
What if it's Conor McGregor?
I mean, again, if you're the UFC and you're looking at
Conor's another guy who doesn't seem all that interested in being a champion right now. He too is looking for
listen, I don't think from the UFC standpoint, I think they get the best of both worlds, that they get a one night gigantic profit. Yeah. And if anything we've learned from Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather, a loss is not going to kill Conor McGregor.
No,
a loss to Georges St-Pierre is not going to harm him in any way. That I don't think you have to, there really is not that precedent of one critical loss to a star and their drawing power evaporates. It's
Yeah.
typically over a prolonged period where there's a pattern, and you see an Anderson Silva. It's like Chris Weidman did not kill Anderson Silva, but it was a prolonged absence of the Anderson Silva of old and his performance rather than one loss. But I mean, your gut, is this it for Georges St-Pierre?
Oh man, it's so hard
because
to
retirements
say.
in fighting are always going to
Of
come with a
course.
raised eyebrow.
So in this press conference, did Jordan make any mention of any physical issues that he was having?
None. He said he felt he was at the top of his game. He just said, I don't have the hunger I used to have.
I mean, I'm very skeptical. I think you can purchase hunger in a lot of MMA fighters. So I'm a little bit skeptical.
Maybe I'm a little naive that I view him differently than most, because I think he is one that if he realistically, like, I think when he says the word retirement, that's it. That is that. He did not say that for 4 years when he left. He would not say retirement. The fact he did today, I put more stock into him saying that than most fighters, but could certainly be proven wrong.
Did he allude to what he might be doing with the rest of his life?
He indicated that there was a time when fighting was his life. It was everything. And he said that's not the case anymore. Like, fighting is an element that I'm going to free up, and I'm going to have plenty more to fill that hole in my life. He didn't get into specifics. You can see
there are a lot of dinosaur bones left to be.
Well, he is someone that has delved a bit into acting. I don't know if that's something significantly, like, listen, he's on his own time. He has no pressures in life.
I want to see the Batroc the Leaper spinoff.
Going to
in the MCU,
going to hunt for dinosaurs and aliens. I mean, he's an interesting guy. He is a very, very interesting individual.
He really is.
Before we go to Ariel, let's get to some wrestling stories quickly, because there were a bunch. The first one is The Hollywood Reporter that came out with a story on Wednesday that there is a biopic in development on Terry Bollea, Hulk Hogan, which they are in the midst of finalizing with Netflix, which would see Chris Hemsworth, Thor, playing the role of Hulk Hogan, and would feature director Todd Phillips, Scott Silver as the writer, and among the producers listed was Eric Bischoff, with Hulk Hogan serving as a consultant, and they will not be delving into the years containing some of Hulk Hogan's scandals. So this seems like it will be a very, very favorable representation of Hulk Hogan's life, and perhaps using his first book as the blueprint of his life, which is quite the work of fiction, that first book.
I guess I would just love to know, like, how, why, and what. Like, I don't know. I'm just seeing some of the reaction online to this news, and a lot of people are questioning what Chris Hemsworth is doing, coming off of, the biggest franchise in box office history, potentially in the Avengers, and choosing a project like this. And I think, to me,
do you realize we could get Vince McMahon and Hulk Hogan biopics in the next few years?
I'd much rather watch the Vince one than the Hulk.
They're both going to be completely ludicrous.
Yeah,
like, I can't imagine the Observer length when those movies come out.
But Hulk Hogan's reputation, I think, very much, like, I know we're in a wrestling bubble, and I know, like, Saudi Arabia ultimately, did change a whole lot. He was still on their TV and everything. But the public perception of Hulk Hogan is still not very strong. I'm seeing, like, reactions to this news come out on Twitter, and it's just the same memes that came out during that Saudi Arabia show when, Hulk Hogan was trending. Like, WWE was, like, proclaiming Hulk Hogan's trending, and beneath every response,
you click on it,
is a meme, like, making fun of Hulk Hogan and alluding to the still very negative public image that he has, that I feel Hulk Hogan has yet to really answer for. So somebody as A-list as Chris Hemsworth being attached to this project, I was actually quite surprised by it. If this was like a, made for TV movie, I wouldn't be all that surprised. But the fact that it's Chris Hemsworth, this was also a Netflix production.
They're in talks to finalize this deal with Netflix.
Okay. I'm a little bit surprised, to be quite honest. And, those are some legitimate names in Todd Phillips being attached to it as well.
Yeah. And I don't know how you do a Hulk Hogan movie without covering the Gawker stuff. Like, it just seems like that is such a gate.
I guess you cut it off at, like, I don't know, what's WrestleMania 3, maybe you cut it off at I don't know, what would you consider, like, the peak ending of his?
If you're doing PR for this movie, if you're sending a Chris Hemsworth out to do interviews, how much of those interviews are spent talking about, like, how do you dance around the actual issues with Hulk Hogan?
See, that's the movie I want. I want to see maybe the movie that Hulk Hogan is not involved with that dives into issues like that. The one that looks at it from more of a critical stance.
Yeah.
But I mean, I have no interest in seeing a Terry Bollea, associated produced project.
This movie will set one record already, and that is the longest in advance I've ever booked a guest.
Chris Hemsworth?
No, Chris Hemsworth is not available. But I have already assigned Brian Mann to review this movie with us when it comes out.
He's the perfect choice.
I could not imagine anyone but Brian Mann joining us to review this movie. So that is one record that we have set. What else do we have here? You had a chance to see NXT on Wednesday night.
Yes.
They also held the NXT tapings on Wednesday night. I will keep it spoiler free, but they did announce the Dusty Rhodes Tag Team Classic with the 8 teams, the winners of which will go to TakeOver to take on the War Raiders. And all 4 of the call-ups this week were used at the tapings on Wednesday, and it seems like they will be there through at least WrestleMania.
Yeah. Again, without talking about what we're about to see in the spoilers, I am going to be very intrigued in seeing how the presence of these 4 continues on the main roster while maintaining their current storylines that are set to take place in these NXT episodes that are going to air.
What a logistical nightmare.
Crazy. Yeah.
We also have, this came out just after Rewind to SmackDown, but Tye Dillinger, Ron Arneal, requested his release from the WWE.
Keyword requested.
Exactly. And I've contacted the WWE. They have not responded yet. And I know others have also contacted them, and we have not heard any response about their status, about Dillinger's status. There is no knowledge that this release has been granted yet. But it's an interesting play that he made this public and kind of forcing the hand of the company.
It's worked out for a number of people so far, like look at the Revival, look at, I mean, I guess you can't say really Dean Ambrose has kind of benefited that much from it, but
neither of those guys went out and explicitly stated we want our releases.
I guess not. But the news did come out, and they were kind of like not necessarily in denial of it, Yeah.
But here's the deal: he comes on Tuesday night after he has gone to management with this request. What was the response? It obviously was not done, because he would have said, I've been granted my release. He did not say that.
No.
So it's a crafty move to then go later that night after you presumably are not granted your release, or at least told we'll sit on it. He has not given clearance to,
sure.
And he decides, I'm going to go put this out there.
But if you're Tye Dillinger, at this point, what do you have to lose, by doing this? Or do you have more to gain by simply telling this to the audience? Hey, I'm unhappy working here. It's up to management to make me happy, or they can grant me my release and I can find my own happiness in another place. He really has nothing to lose. And I'm sure a lot of other wrestlers are seeing him wrestlers like him do stuff like this and think that, hey, like now is a time in the professional wrestling industry where I actually have some leverage, as low on the card as I may be, as being Tye Dillinger. So, to pull a stunt like this, we'll see how it turns out. Now, is he a name that you would like to see in AEW, or do you think that they should be staying away from guys like?
I'd be very cautious about going. I would say that if you're AEW, you have the most desirable roster spots in the industry at the moment, and if you want to fill those slots, I think you have to have a solid idea for what you're going to do. To me, ex-WWE guy that is coming in and will give a push, that's not enough for me.
Yeah.
It's got to be something concrete, that this guy has something so special that this other company has missed out on. Because if your defining trait is that you're an ex-WWE guy that's coming to prove them wrong, I just think you have to have a higher, like, that can't be it alone.
I think there has to be a level of intrigue and a level of people seeing a lot more potential within you that is not being realized. I think Dillinger kind of falls into that realm. Certainly,
he could also grow into becoming a great producer or trainer,
sure,
and that could be ultimately where he ends up in.
I kind of see Dean Ambrose kind of in that same light too, where if I mean, yes and no. It's all dependent on how much maybe his current run is attributed to him versus how much is attributed to creative. But I think the potential Dean Ambrose that we all wanted to see in this heel run, the John Moxley, version of Dean Ambrose that we didn't get to see. I think everybody's very hopeful that outside of the WWE they will get that.
SmackDown did 2,269,000 viewers Tuesday night. It's their highest number since November 13th and 10% above their average this year.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you attribute that to? Is that the Kofi factor? Is it the call-ups from Monday? Is it a combination of that? Plus you're coming off a pay-per-view.
Mm-hmm.
And this following Raw that had a fantastic first hour.
Yep.
That I think the fact that it trickled over to Tuesday, I think it could be a number of factors.
I have to believe that it's more so to me the combination of it being after a pay-per-view, but also maybe some of the buzz from the NXT call-ups. But almost doesn't matter until we see next week's number, right?
Mm-hmm. They all went to postwrestling.com in the afternoon, read that they were going to be on SmackDown, and boom, you get your highest number in months.
But I mean, I think it's all kind of irrelevant, until the next week and the week after.
I'd say if you want to argue that the Kofi Kingston thing has some momentum, that number is certainly in your favor. I think you can make that argument.
Sure.
And this was a show built around Kofi in the main event, and
I guess we'll see more of it in the coming weeks.
Yeah.
More of this, more of the NXT guys as well.
Right. We also had Takeshi Iizuka's retirement earlier today. I have not watched the match yet, but that is one we will be discussing in the coming days.
I have to say the New Japan English YouTube channel has this great video that just details his history with Tenzan that I thought was wonderfully put together. So if you haven't watched that match yet, I encourage you to go check that out before.
I will recommend Pac and Will Ospreay from Friday.
Yeah.
The Rev Pro high stakes card from York Hall. Also, we have a new British Wrestling Experience up on the site. And
with live reports from both those shows.
Yes. So you can check that out up at the site with a great rundown of not just that card, but also OTT's homecoming event, the latest 16 karat gold announcements, progress,
NXT UK.
Everything.
Those guys watch
90 minutes of everything.
Those guys watch so much, like more than we do that we get to talk about. So please appreciate their hard work.
What are you going to be checking out this weekend? It's a rather quiet one.
I'll watch some of the New Japan material that's out this week. They're putting on, of course, the Iizuka retirement show, and as well as Honor Rising. So I'll check out some standout matches from that.
Yeah, it's not the quietest weekend. There's a UFC card Saturday afternoon. There's a Bellator card Saturday night.
There's UFC and Bellator every week. It feels like
pretty much. Yeah. I think there's a UFC card every weekend until WrestleMania weekend. They are not running WrestleMania weekend, so that's at least a bit of a positive.
I mean, let's enjoy this kind of non-AEW era while we can, because I think once that gets going, it'll be just even crazier. I sometimes, what do you think those guys have in store for WrestleMania weekend?
Who's that?
I'm talking about like the Elite,
I don't think anything.
No, not as far as a show, but like as we've seen, they've been known to crash a number of shows, and I think WrestleMania
I don't think they'll have any presence that weekend.
Really? Why? Yeah. Why do you say that?
I think that they're going to be smart enough that they're not going to be looking at I think they realize that it's not their weekend, and I'd be very surprised. Not to say they don't crash a show.
I can see them crashing a show a day, multiple shows a day.
It's possible. Maybe they'll be in the clusterfuck.
That would be strange. But yeah, I mean, Joey Janela's putting on a show. Penta and Phoenix are going to be everywhere. So
maybe a whole night of Joey Janela skits.
Great. Yeah. Awesome.
Its own stand-up show.
Awesome.
I'm going to call Ariel. Do you want to give everyone the information about our live show that weekend?
Yes. Of course, if you're listening to this right now, hopefully you're a fan of ours. And if you also happen to be in the New York area during WrestleMania weekend, John and I are putting on a live Q&A post-wrestling live in New York. We are doing that on the Sunday, hours before WrestleMania. So if you're in town, drop by the Broadway Comedy Club, where John and I will be answering all of your questions, talking a little bit maybe about our growth as pro wrestling and as podcasters. And then, of course, meeting and greeting all of you. We want to take photos with everybody. We want to give you guys postcards. So if you want tickets, all the information is at postwrestling.com/live. And if you're a patron, Tickets are $20. For the general public, tickets are $25. So again, postwrestling.com/live. We hope to see all of you.
That is Post Wrestling live in New York, WrestleMania weekend. We hope to see many of you there. Maybe even this man. He is joining us now from ESPN, live in Montreal. Ariel Helwani joining us on the Café Hangout. Ariel, how are you?
I'm doing great. Live from my parents' living room.
Wow.
That's how live we are right now.
Man, this guy, what a day you have had, Ariel. When did you arrive in Montreal? Was this an early morning trek, or did you arrive a day early?
It was an early morning trek.
Oh, wow.
No, because yesterday there was all kinds of weather issues where I live. It's a very long text message sound. So I couldn't fly out last night, and all this kind of happened very last minute, as you guys know. So I took a 6:30 a.m. flight, and I was super nervous about that because this press conference was at 10:30, and I'm perpetually nervous.
Mm-hmm.
But the flight was on time, even though there was some snow here, and I went straight from the airport to the Bell Center. I had to get changed into my suit in an airport bathroom stall at the airport of Montreal, which was just for a germaphobe like myself, an absolute horrific experience. But I made it on time, and all's well that ends well.
Did you mention any of this en français while you were speaking with George at this press conference?
Now, let me explain the en français to you Ontarioites. Is it Ontarioites or
Ontarians?
Ontarians. So the gentleman that was sort of emceeing this, who's I think his name is Justin, who's very good at his job. He's a former press secretary for Prime Minister Paul Martin, I learned afterwards. Very on top of his game. He told me that in Quebec, it is a massive no-no if the first question goes to a non-French-speaking journalist, that you have to always defer to the French media first, et cetera, et cetera. He said, we'd like to give you the honor of asking the first question, but you have to ask in French and English. And I said, yeah, that's fine. It's going to be really choppy French, but I'm more than happy to do it. It's an honor to be asked. Fine, I'll do. Why not? So I wasn't trying to like flex my muscles or anything there. I was asked to do that as to not ruffle any feathers.
I was very happy that you did it. I thought it was awesome that the first question comes from Ariel Helwani in French. You flex those muscles, Ariel. I mean, you work on that verbal physique. You get to flex.
Well, I appreciate that, and it was really cool to be there. Honestly, I'm really happy that ESPN let me go cover it. And afterwards, we got a 30-minute sit down with George right before he left. He did all the media rounds. Then we sat down with him and shared a nice moment. Honestly, it's very surreal for me because it's Montreal, it's my hometown, it's Georges St-Pierre. If you would have told me when I started, watching MMA that George, who's the face of Canadian MMA, who I went to a sports bar here to watch win the welterweight title against Matt Hughes at UFC 65, that I'd be interviewing him on his retirement day and reminiscing with him and all this stuff in my hometown where the Canadians play. I couldn't make something for ESPN, who I dreamed of working for. It's kind of a surreal thing. It's my first time coming home and working in Montreal as a member of the ESPN team. So I'm prone to be emotional, and I was a little emotional today as well.
We had a similar situation like this with George, not exactly, but we go back to 2013. It's about a week after the Johnny Hendricks fight, and he is set to make an appearance at a mall in Quebec City. And Wai and I get sent on a plane to go to this mall in Quebec City. And right prior to his appearance, he does the conference call to announce his sabbatical and relinquishing the welterweight title. And I was sharing this story earlier, Ariel, that several weeks later, I got to do a sit down with George, and it was a different person I was speaking to. The weight of the world was off his shoulders. Like, we tended to be around him fight week where he was so wound up and a robot, just preparing for what he has explained, the part of fighting he hated the most, which was fight day. When you sat down with him today, we've seen a much more relaxed George over the past 5 years, but did you get any kind of any sense of George and a certain relief right after the press conference today?
100%, and that's a great analogy. It was even more so today. I believe, but yes, he left the door a little open if someone calls him with that Khabib fight or whatever. But I really feel like he's at peace, and I feel like it's great that we finally have gotten to see the real George. Because you're 100% right. Like I think back to the George that fought Koscheck and Jake Shields and Matt Serra and all those guys, and that guy was like a robot because he was so nervous, and I don't think we really understood at the time how nervous he was come fight day. And so now it's really cool to see how relaxed he is, how at peace he is. And it's interesting. You mentioned that moment at UFC 167 or after UFC 167 where he sort of hinted that he was going to walk away and then eventually did it around 10, 11 days later. In my sit down with him today that will hopefully be coming out later, he actually said that was one of the biggest regrets of his career, the way he handled that situation, that he understands why Dana was mad at him that night, and that in hindsight he wished he handled it a little bit differently. And I've never heard him say that before. And so it was cool to hear a reflective George, a happy George, an excited George, a George that realizes he has nothing left to prove. And isn't it amazing? Two things really struck me today. Number one, him going out on top is, something that not only in combat sports is hard to pull off, but in sports in general, there's very few athletes that have gone out on top as winners, as champions, and in particular in combat sports. I mean, you could probably count them on one hand. The athletes that it wasn't uncomfortable watching them at the end. Lennox Lewis was one of the last boxers to do it the right way. I guess Mayweather, although he comes and goes. Joe Calzaghe did it. So this is a really special thing that he's doing. And also, like, not one infraction, not one embarrassment, not one PD violation, not one run-in with the law. I mean, yeah, we can nitpick and say DJ Penn accused him of greasing. I mean, fine if you want to call it that, but he was never actually, found guilty of that. But like nothing, there's no blemishes on his record. That's a pretty incredible thing. So I'm happy to hear him say that he has nothing left to prove and that he's able to walk away at peace.
Can you speak, Ariel, as to what he meant to Montreal and to Quebec as a whole? Because that's something that John and I can't really speak to.
Yeah, 100%. He means a lot. It's funny. I told him afterwards, every single one of my friends, everyone who knows what I do for a living, who lives in Montreal, they all have a Georges St-Pierre story. He's kind of like a mascot here. Everyone has seen him. He trains at the Y. What's that?
Him and UP.
Yes. Well, he's like, he's a less lovable one because you don't want to like hug him. But I mean, some people do want to hug him, but like he's omnipresent. He really is. He likes the nightlife here. He loves restaurants. He loves talking about restaurants. He loves going out to eat. He loves going around town. Like everyone has a George story, and everyone has a positive George story. Everyone has a great run-in with him. And back, when he was coming up, Montrealers, even less, like, I think we kind of have an inferiority complex when it comes to, what we are able to accomplish outside of Montreal. In hockey, of course, Quebecers are very dominant, but in nothing else. Like, there's no great Montreal basketball players or football players, sort of like there's the odd, player from Ontario who's good at basketball. RJ Barrett is good at basketball. He's from Ontario. But we don't get that. And so for someone to succeed the way he was succeeding on such a large scale, it made us really proud. And I am not joking when I say when I saw him win at UFC 65, it inspired me to want to become an MMA journalist, because I was like, look at this guy from Montreal doing this on the biggest scale stage possible in this sport. Why can't I do this as well? And like UFC 83, he opened the door to the UFC to come to Canada. He opened the door to the UFC to come to Ontario. I don't think these things happen, certainly not on the scale in which they did without him. We throw around face of this, face of that. I mean, he carried that company on his shoulders in this part of the world, and certainly in this city. And think about how many times they came to this city. Think about how many times they sold out with him at the top of the bill. And then think about when he left, what the crowds were like, were you guys at UFC 186? That was one of the most depressing nights I've ever, experienced in MMA. It was horrible. So he was just huge. We were all so proud of him, and he never let us down. It was really amazing, to be a Montrealer growing up as he was the man, because he was doing so well, and he represented the city so well.
It's funny. I just watched the TSN documentary on Donovan Bailey, and they go back to the moment after he beats Michael Johnson in the 150 meter runoff at the Sky Dome. And afterwards, he does the interview calling Michael Johnson a chicken. And I'm a kid at that point and didn't really focus on how much brushback Donovan Bailey got for that comment because it was considered very un-Canadian. And I think that's a part of Georges St-Pierre that here in this sport that we so often associate with the Floyd Mayweathers or Conor McGregors, that Georges St-Pierre, he was also just as captivating a personality by being the antithesis of that. And I think a lot of that was the Canadian element that we saw in Georges St-Pierre that you see in a lot of these fighters that have very deep ties to their country of origin.
Yeah, and to that point, like, what's one of the most famous Georges St-Pierre lines? I'm not impressed by your performance.
Right.
Why? Because it was so out of character for him. And he later explained that, like, he didn't mean to say it that way. It's just because his English at the time wasn't very good. That was so shocking, and it stuck with all of us because he's the guy who never trash talked anyone. Like, even Nick Diaz, tried to get under his skin and said a lot of things about him and accused him of a lot of things. And BJ Penn did the same, and he never broke out of his character. So that was supremely impressive as well. And you're 100% right. I think a lot of Canadians looked up to him in that regard. But I brought up this question yesterday on one of the shows that I do, the MMA Reporters. I wonder if Georges St-Pierre in 2019, if he's in his prime at 2019, like the Georges St-Pierre at UFC 83 and 129, 124, is he as popular and as successful in today's UFC as he was 8-9 years ago? And I'm not 100% sure because I think the fans have been programmed to gravitate toward, like, look at Tony Ferguson. The guy can't get a title shot. And he's won 10, 11 in a row. 10 years ago, he's getting a title shot. George didn't have that colorful personality. I think that Conor has changed the game and changed people's appetite and tastes. And I wonder if George is as successful today. Like, what do you guys think? Is he as successful today as he was 10 years ago? I'm not so sure about that.
I think that there is certainly, I think it's great that you can have a Conor McGregor, but you don't want to have a sport with them. And you need to have those contrasting figures. And I wonder today that if the UFC is almost the idea of what a star is, they've kind of put that into a smaller box, that they have a narrower view. That to me, it is the great contrast. And Georges St-Pierre and Randy Couture are extreme examples of having that babyface figure. Like, I compared Georges St-Pierre to several generations ago of Bruno Sammartino, like the strong ethnic babyface that had his people come out just to see him vanquish the villain of the month. And look at how we saw other guys alter themselves because they knew they weren't going to out good guy Georges St-Pierre. If you were Josh Koscheck or Matt Serra or Nick Diaz, like, these were guys that understood their roles in that promotion as well. But it's a great question. If I think inevitably George would have a tougher road if he's entering the UFC today, because that demeanor is not rewarded. You're not given the opportunity to showcase it to a larger audience.
But I think what makes George so exceptional is that, like, he is in many ways, I guess, sort of a vanilla babyface, but he's not vanilla. Like, I think he's a very captivating personality when you hear him speak, despite him not cussing, not saying anything all that derogatory about his opponents. He is just able to kind of talk about what he respects and, just kind of vouch for, like, very positive virtues, yet he does not come across boring at all to me. So I think he would be successful today.
There was a time, though, that I think people were accusing him of being boring in the ring, boring with his interviews. And I think over time he's gotten a lot better in every aspect. I mean, his last fight against Bisping was amazing. But somewhat to your point, I'm wondering about this new era for George, this new chapter, because we know he's interested in drug testing. We know that, he was a part of that union not that long ago. And does he get involved in that? Does he try to help the fighters? Does he try to help things right? Does he try to help with collective bargaining? I'm really curious about that. I asked him about that today, and he kind of said, I'm interested in helping both sides. I'm interested in helping the fighters. He even said that, he regrets going through with the Johnny Hendricks fight. If he said he should have just said that I'm not going to do the fight if you're not going to do the proper drug testing. So these are things that obviously mean a lot to him, and he can really galvanize a lot of fighters. He can really, get them to unionize or get them to be on the same page. I think it would be really interesting to see if he actually goes through with that now that, he's officially done with the sport.
My last question here, Ariel. Tonight, when you're on your way back home and you're laying back, Are you going to pop on People in Planes, as you will probably be on a plane, and listen to Last Man Standing?
So actually, I'm staying one night here in Montreal because I found out that he is going to be at the Canadiens game, and he's going to drop the puck and be celebrated with a ceremony of some kind. And I thought I might as well see that and, get the whole spectrum of the day's festivities. Plus, it's not often that I get to come home. So I'll do that tomorrow. And I think that is one of the best segments in the history of UFC programming. Also, Casey, my longtime friend, cameraman, posted another one, the Carlos Condit one. I forget the song now, but he posted
Lightning
it
Crashes
on Twitter. Yes,
yeah,
that's
a good one too.
Because I think in that one you really get to see like how stressed he is about fighting, right? And what a line today. Also, something I never heard him saying that like one of his proudest moments was getting up after that Carlos Condit head kick, and he later expanded on that, saying that he tried to get up, he tried to stand up after he got dropped by the head kick, and he started thinking about the Matt Serra fight and remembered that when he was dropped against Matt Serra, he didn't have his legs under him and then got dropped again. So he said, I'm going to sit back down and gather myself. So really, really great stuff from George today. And how rare is it also in MMA that like there's a press conference to announce retirement and the UFC is on board and there's no bad blood and it's not like, screw you, this and that. Like it was just a great day for the sport. For the sport. It was a great day for everyone. So I'm really happy that I could be here to experience it and cover it.
Well, Ariel, I know you've had such a busy day. Thank you so much for taking some time out to join us. We definitely want to have you on just to share a couple minutes here on the career of, a real seminal figure in Canadian sports history in Georges St-Pierre, and the coverage in Canada today. If you have not gotten to see it, like this was a major sports story across Canada today.
Great.
So
I'm happy to hear it. Remember Dana White once said that he's the most famous athlete in Canada, and everyone said that he was crazy. By the way, I thought that was one of the greatest pieces of promoting Dana ever did. I don't know if I agree with him, but just getting him in that conversation I thought was brilliant. Sorry to interrupt there, but I'm happy. I haven't seen the coverage. I'm happy to hear that he's getting the respect that he deserves.
And we'll keep our eyes peeled for your sit-down interview with Georges St-Pierre. Of course, you can catch Ariel Helwani with Ariel Helwani's MMA show Mondays at 1 p.m. at ESPN. The MMA reporters, which I guess I'm not part of the ESPN family, so I haven't been invited to appear on, but I'm always available.
Well, so far it's just been ESPN guys.
I get it.
That. I'm going to expand. Don't worry. Jeez, way to put me on the spot. You see, Wade doesn't put me on the spot like that.
Oh, I don't expect a thing. I'm grateful to be on my own show.
Yes. Well, I had you in studio once many moons ago,
yes,
but then never again. I learned my lesson.
I like to consider us, the building blocks of your radio empire. We were guests like in the single digits of the show. I mean, that's quite the accomplishment.
Oh yeah. I mean, I didn't know how to book any guests. I didn't know anyone, so I had to rely on you guys, and I'm always appreciative.
You had to go for the bottom of the Rolodex at the beginning, and you built it up to Georges St-Pierre sit-down interview on retirement day.
Yeah.
Ariel, thanks a lot. Safe travels home, and appreciate you stopping by to chat with us.
No problem. Anytime, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Ariel.
That was Ariel Helwani.
Wow, so nice of him to make time out of his very busy schedule today for us.
I asked him, and today I knew it was going to be a hectic day for him, and he carved out some time for us. So I really appreciate that a lot. And with that is going to bring an end to the Café Hangout. I think one of our better Café Hangouts.
Yeah, thank you to all the callers who called in. Thank you to everybody who was in the chat room with us today. If you're listening to this on Friday in the archived recording, either on our podcast feed or on YouTube, we do these live every Thursday for our Café patrons with video access. So that's $12 and above. If you support our channel for that, we give you a live show like this once a week.
And with that, I'm going to try some of these Girl Scout cookies as we sign off and bid you adieu.